Employers and managers who had to fire someone on their first day. What happened? I got to fire my co-manager's sister who called 5 minutes before her first shift and said she'd be there in an hour because she just sat down to dinner with friends. What do you mean you just sat down for dinner? Your first shift is in 5 minutes. Yeah, I know. But we were out and decided to go for dinner. I'll still be there, just a little late. An hour isn't a little late. Be here in 5 minutes or don't bother coming in at all. But co-manager is my sister. She gave me the job. Yes, she did. See you in 5. Or not at all, but co-manager is my sister. My co-manager was actually happy about it. She knew her sister would be a crafty employee and only agreed to hire her because we were desperately short-staffed and she could start immediately. And to those asking if an hour is that big a deal, yes. Yes, it is. This was a hospitality position, and the roster is based around expected volume of customers. An hour short-staffed means less customers served, which means less money through the till short-term, and pissed-off customers, which means less money long-term. Story 2. I worked at a popular teen college kid clothing store. I wasn't the manager, but I trained new hires. This one girl shopped at the store a lot, and we were excited to hire her. She was let go because she was late, was caught trying on clothes instead of greeting, and apparently laughed when anyone asked for a size larger than a medium. Her family showed up at the end of her shift and tried to buy $1,000 worth of clothes with her employee discount. Corporate policy sucks, so they got a good portion of it. Her mom tried to bring it all back years later, completely worn, destroyed, and threw a fit saying she should get full price because the girl pass. Guess who we could all see sitting in her mom's car? Story 3. I'm a teacher. I was on a committee to hire a new 5th grade teacher. I was showing her the ropes and monitoring her in class behavior. I watched this bonehead tell a student, "I don't like you very much. Figure it out yourself." The next thing I showed her was the door. In the exit interview, had on the walk to the door. I demanded an explanation, and she said of the student she didn't like. She said, he was wearing designer jeans. You know his life is all peaches and cream, taking from us little guys. I say, did he make an inappropriate comment to you about money? She says, no, but I know they're kind. Story 4. My chef hired a guy who was less than a week out of prison for dealing. He was just going to wash dishes. Seemed like an okay guy, just looking for some work because he had just done 5 years. So day 1, he goes to head chef and asks, hey man, you know anybody here who wants to buy heroin? Out the door, 2 hours into his first job out of the joint. Story 5. It position supposedly had a BA in computer science with 2 years experience in relevant technical position. I didn't interview him. We very quickly discovered that his computer abilities were non-existent. Started asking questions until he broke down and said he lied on his resume because he wanted to make more money. His previous job was drywall installation. We gave him a list of software he needed, available via a URL. He didn't know what to do with a URL or what a URL was, and then it quickly unraveled. It was about 3 hours because the first 2 were paperwork. Story 6. The job hours were from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. Our new hire showed up about 10 minutes late on the first day. Normally, 10 minutes late isn't that big a deal to me, but it was his first day, and I had pulled 3 other staff members into our 8 a.m. meeting so we could discuss the training schedule with our new hire. So we are already in our meeting when the new guy walks in. He doesn't apologize for being late. He just sits down as I'm going over the training schedule for the week. After a few minutes of listening to us discuss what he's going to be doing for the rest of this week, he raises his hand and says, can we reschedule the afternoon sessions planned for today and tomorrow? I have to leave at 11 today and 12:30 tomorrow. This was the first time I was hearing about these plans. I asked the 3 staff supervisors to give me an opportunity to speak with the new guy alone for a few minutes. They leave the room, so I start talking to the guy about how he can't just change his schedule without running it by management first. As I'm talking to this guy, he gets a text. He looks down at his phone and puts his hand up, as if he were telling me, I'll be with you right after I finish reading this text. As soon as he finished reading the text and looked back at me, I said, this isn't going to work. Please make sure you take everything you brought with you and do not return. I'll have HR email you your separation papers. He seemed pretty shocked and asked what he did wrong, so I told him. He tried to explain himself, but I told him that it's best if he finds somewhere else to work. Story 7. The most memorable firing I witnessed was this man who got hired as VP of Marketing. He thought the title gave him the right to be late on his first day for an important meeting with our board members, VP, and CEO. Though irritating, he was given a pass since he was new and rewarded with a second chance to impress. This proved to be useless, as he was later heard propositioning our new intern for sex in exchange to be in this imaginary marketing campaign that supposedly would come with endless perks and cash. The CEO personally escorted him out and kindly told him to go duck himself In the most PC way, of course. I intentionally forgot to add that. Before he left, we all took part of a wild workplace sex, where the CEO was the bottomed and I wore a strapped-on. There was a circle get too. The Circus du Soleil even came and finished us off with their magic and flexed bodies. When the VPOFM left, we all cried tears of sorrow as he walked out to his Jaguar, to the beat of Eye of the Tiger. Life resumed that day, but it was never the same, you know? Sobs in corner, but seriously, it was a lot more boring than I made it to be. He made inappropriate offer. CEO led him downstairs with security. They walked to the side door where VPOFM was told to never come back. Go fornicate with thyself and some. And he walked out. Sometimes, gasp the CEO do more. Then sit at his desk and drink whiskey as a parade of hungry assistants come over and offer to suck him off. Sometimes they do OMG paperwork. Are there some CEOs who are lazy, incompetent, and embodies the cliche bosses we see on TV shows and movies? Of course there are. This world wouldn't be half as productive if there weren't people like that around. However, from my personal experiences, working with vice presidents and CEOs, they do more for their businesses. Then they let people believe they do. I've had to work an all-nighter with my bosses more times than I can count, reworking drafts and presentations, fretting over meetings, negotiating budget deals, and sacrificing our personal life to get the job done. Then, of course, the people who never see that always assume that you're just a glorified assistant and slept your way to the top for that raise you got. Or in my boss's case, they just sit pretty at their desk and go out to fancy restaurants every day. They don't believe that most of the work we do are done behind office doors, usually at night and away from wandering eyes. But, to be fair, I have had nights where I did nothing but shredded documents and drank beer margaritas while my boss shopped online for vacation deals. All the while, the looming stack of paperwork went untouched. It's call balance. Story 8. I work for a company that takes care of the HR needs of other small companies in my area. New hires often come in to fill out paperwork. We had this guy who came in, filled out his name and social security number, gave it to us, then proceeded to steal the front desk guy's wallet and keys, right in front of the very visible security camera. Turns out, the police knew the guy, as we was a repeat offender. He lived right around the corner. Story 9. Did a Tarzan swing on an overhead hoist remote cable, going some 20 feet before the cable tore out. It only took maintenance 20 minutes to fix, but he was gone by then. Story 10. Know someone who works at a warehouse that stores and ships boxes of pharmaceuticals. There are some understandably pretty tight handling rules, so nothing goes missing and everything is stored properly. One day, they had a guy start that asked if they should open the oxy to count them, to make sure that there was as many in the bottle as it said there would. He asked multiple people this, was gone shortly after. Story 11. Not an employer or manager, but a girl at my job showed up absolutely plastered on her first day of work. Working at a machine shop, I'm sure you can imagine that this was especially a no-no. I still wonder why anyone would show up drunk on their first day of work. Nerves, maybe? Story 12. I managed a bookstore that had an auxiliary calendar kiosk at the other end of the shopping center. Hired a woman to man it, did her morning training, left her alone for a bit, went back to check on her and found half the calendar stolen and her asleep behind the curtains. We used to hide backstock. I've never been so angry. Story 13. I manage a coffee shop lunchy place. Young girl came in fresh out of culinary school and had previous coffee shop experience. What could go wrong, right? The first day I had her shadow the other employees just to get a hang of the POS system and general flow of the store. Nope, customers overwhelmed her, and she liked to hide in the back, leaning on the ice machine. Fine, whatever. She said she loved baking earlier on, so I sent her to the kitchen to make some cookies. I'm super chill, I didn't even care what kind. As long as they were ducking awesome and delicious, she had creative control. She comes out sometime later admitting she doesn't know how to make cookies and needs help. Now I'm getting bloody frustrated. As we move on into lunch rush, a wave of customers flood the front of house, and I was needed. I had 40 liters of soup in the back, needing a titch more roux, and asked her to thicken it a tad before serving. Surely she could handle that. Soups and sauces being addressed in the first bloody week of the culinary school she apparently attended. I attended the same program, BTW. Nope. She found a box of cornstarch and dumped the whole box in. Dry. Soup destroyed. Her shift ended shortly afterwards. Turns out I forgot to get her contact information at the beginning of the shift, so I had to message her on Facebook, telling her not to bother ever returning. Classy, I know, but she was just one huge bloody mess I couldn't even begin to fix. Story 14. I'm not a manager, but I had a potential coworker who called in sick. I guess he didn't know that the manager didn't have to work through the evening and bumped into him at the movies. My boss told us this as he fired him the next day. Story 15. My old manager, matron at a psychiatric secure hospital, told me of a guy who was employed as a healthcare assistant, working with people with a learning disability. Part of his role involved escorting patients into the community to help them with shopping. He took his first charge to a shopping center and proceeded to spend £250 on their debit card, buying electronic goods for himself, which he then brought back to the hospital, and asked for them to be stored in the staff room until the end of his shift. He left with the police. Story 16. Worked retail management. On Black Friday, we had a new guy, and his one job was to greet customers. Literally, hi, welcome. Two older ladies walked in, and he says, "What the heck is up?" I told him, "Your time working here." I clocked him out remotely and told him to enjoy his family because he wouldn't be shopping with the $4 he made working that half hour. Story 17. I worked as a manager in an upscale seafood restaurant a few years ago. We had recently hired a few more four staff, to cope with the customer demand as summer was starting. Excited to train up new staff for the first time ever. 3 of them turned up on time and got started with their buddy staff. Guy number 4 turned up over an hour late, stunk of alcohol and beau, and had dark yellow pit semen on his apparently new white uniform shirt. I fired him within 10 minutes. He then proceeded to knock over chairs and pull tablecloths off tables, so security was called. First person I ever fired. I felt bad and then went out for a smoke before getting back into work. Another reason why I left the hospitality industry. Staff turnover too high, too easy to burn out. Story 18. I didn't fire this guy personally, but I did one better. I arrested him. I'm a police officer in the UK. I was forced to help on a recruitment event in our headquarters where applicants turned up, listened to a talk, and did a few exams. Almost all wore suits or shirts and ties, except one. One was wearing a black polo shirt, black combat trousers, and tactical boots. Weird and a bad impression, but whatever. Whilst they do the exam, I went into the yard for a smoke. All the applicants had to park in a certain area, which was just by the smoking shelter. One car stood out. It looked just like our unmarked cars. Exactly like our unmarked. I was a little confused, so I had a closer look at it. It had radiator lights, and on the back seat was a police-issue stab vest. I thought that it must be one of our cars parked in the wrong place. It happens. After the exam they left, I watched them leave, and lo and behold, Polo Shirt Man gets in the unmarked car. Immediately, I jump in a real unmarked and take off after him. I found him 2 streets away, putting blue lights on and driving through a red light. I overtook him, put my lights on, and blocked him. He gets out waving a fake warrant card, telling me he was en route to an emergency, arrested for impersonating a police officer. He was also suspected of doing the same in about 3 other forces. Story 19. So I am a reporter, and our interns come in and shadow us from time to time. This kid came in for his first shadowing with me, and we were headed to a nicer event, one which required we wear nicer attire. He'd been asked by my editor not to wear jeans or shorts, but to dress business casual, slacks, and at least a nice button-up shirt or polo. Well, he showed up late, and he showed up in jeans and flip-flops. I didn't even ask my editor. I sent him home before he could walk into the event with me. Later, I was honest with my editor about what happened. The intern did not return for a second day. I'd like to add, I did not fire him. Simply sent him home after asking if he had a change of clothes, and he told me no. I had to explain to my boss why the intern wasn't at the event with me. I have no idea if she fired him or if he simply chose not to show up again. Believe me, reporters don't make a ton of money, and I know interns sure as hell don't. I worked my ass off for 2 years, taking no pay or little pay journalism internships. I wasn't going to embarrass him or make him feel ashamed if he didn't own proper attire. If he did not, it would have been up to him to bring that to the editor's attention when she asked him to wear business casual attire. I know she certainly would not have embarrassed him or fired him if he didn't own the proper clothing. Story 20. Work at a used record store. While giving the guy the tour, he mentions how we underbelly our LPs and lets us know he's just going to use his employee discount to resell all the good stuff that comes in our eBay store. He lasted about an hour. Story 21. New firefighter in my city. Had just finished 5 months academy, graduated the night before. His whole family is there, the mayor, half the city council, and the fire chief pins his badge, and then he is assigned to a station. The rookie is told to report to the police department the next morning for tactical driver training, obstacle course, and skid pad. Dude shows up the next morning at the police department, an hour late, still drunk from all the celebrating from the night before. Not only fired, but arrested for DUI. That's the end of his firefighting career. Story 22. I was a corporate field manager for a big box camping store, and my job was to travel to new locations and help open new stores. This involved a lot of travel, a lot of hiring, building, and stocking in a short amount of time. We're not in uniform when we're in the stocking phase, so it's common that no one knows who's who. There was a couple of girls that banded together and seemed to be splitting the work of one person while still managing to do it half as fast. I walked over and tried to give them friendly guidance, and they didn't seem to respond positively. I came back an hour later, and they didn't progress very far. When I told them that they needed to step up their game, one of them became aggressive and responded, "Or what? Who the duck do you think you are, talking to me like that? You ain't my boss." She got right in my face like a World Star video and acted like she was going to fight me. Apparently, they had forgotten that I was one of the interviewers, although it was someone else who made the choice to hire them. I said, "Well, actually, I am." They looked mortified as I asked them to follow me. I took them into the office with my VP, and together we wished them well. They begged to keep their jobs, and I had to explain that laziness is bad enough, but insubordination will not be tolerated, at which point they told me to duck myself and left. Story 23. I worked at an upscale cocktail lounge as a bartender. One day my boss hired this new guy to work behind the bar with us. It was rush, and the bar was packed, and we were all running around. Then this new guy comes up to the sink behind the bar, kneels down, puts his hair under the running faucet, and then flings his head back, leaving a splatter on the wall behind him. He then proceeds to smooth his hair down, at rush, in front of customers. He didn't stay long. Story 24. I worked at a substances store. They hired some girl, and on her first day behind the counter alone, she spent 20 minutes scratching unpurchased Lotto tickets and throwing away any losers until the manager saw what she was doing on the security camera and booted her. Story 25. He started chopping out lines on the dashboard 5 minutes after leaving the shop. When I asked what the duck he thought he was doing, he said, "Don't worry, I'll share." Story 26. Hired a new night audit worker. Her first night alone after training, she sat in the lobby and smoked all night, ignoring guests and saying she didn't work there, with her name tag on the front of her shirt, and watched murder mysteries on the giant TV in the lobby. 15 minutes before her shift was over, she just left the building without waiting for her replacement to show up. So, there was no one in the building with over 150 guests upstairs. I saw this all on camera the next day, and she showed up that night for her next shift. I stopped her at the door and told her to go home and not come back. She was perfectly fine during training, but she did mention that she was a stay-at-home mom her entire adult life, and when her husband lost his cushy job, she had to work. I brushed it off as whatever, since we all have to work at some point, but I didn't know her no ducks given attitude was that bad. Story 27. I had an employee who worked for a week. He went to a comedy club, ordered $60 worth of food and booze. When he couldn't pay, he asked if they would charge it to the company he works for, which they declined. The manager of the comedy club called me the next day to talk it over with me. I told him to go pay it that day, since it was payday. He didn't pay them. I fired him the next day. Story 28. A new hire posted to her Facebook page that she was starting a new job, but she was just doing it for the health insurance because she was trying to get pregnant. Then, she was going to quit. Basically, she was going to work there for 9 months, take paid maternity leave for a couple of months, get the medical expenses paid for, then leave. Boss got wind of this on the first day and fired her. That's very tricky legal territory, but essentially she had lied in her interview, saying that she wanted a long career with the company, then admitted online that she was just scamming them for healthcare. Story 29. The fastest turnaround I've ever seen was this guy we hired in support at a tech company. Everyone knew that the structure of our network wasn't ideal, but it worked and we didn't have the resources to fix it. We showed the guy the network diagram and told him this. He immediately declared it unacceptable and marched down to the network manager's office and started listing off all the reasons why the network was wrong. Yeah, you don't lecture the king neckbeard on the first day, and sure as hell not when you're the lowest level peon in the company. He was politely told to get the duck out, less than 4 hours into his first day. Story 30. I work in construction as someone who runs my own contracting business. We do everything from big renovations to even redoing your asphalt-slopped roof, depending on if I have the stomach for it. Roofing duckin' sucks. I hired a laborer once to help me with the cleanup. Basically, his job was to take the old roof we ripped off and threw down, pick it all up and throw it in the bin I had put in the alley from a bin rental. Duckin' simple task. I did it when I was like 15 years old during summer holidays. So I show up with my buddy who works with me. We're sitting in the truck in the morning, drinking coffee, and listening to the radio. There was a can bum in the alley behind the house, and this guy's picking through everyone's trash for cans. I figure, big deal, I see can bums all the time. Well, we get out of the truck. This guy turns out to be my hire from Craigslist. Whatever. No teeth, didn't bring a lunch. He's bumming smokes off my buddy for the day. Hard worker. But doesn't know crap except manual labor. Not very well dressed, not even work boots. So he doesn't step on a nail and have it go right through his foot. So at the end of the day, we're buttoning up the roof, as in it's finished. I'm putting the finishing touches on it, as in caulking and etc. I nonchalantly ask the laborer to come up the ladder. His next task is to remove the remaining bundles of material, get the rest of the stuff, tools, radio, etc. off the roof. I continue finishing up my tasks. On the far side of the roof, we hear this banging noise from the front of property. I get up and walk to the front of the house. This duckin' idiot was throwing the material bundles down onto the owner's paving stone driveway, and he'd turfed my skill saw down too. I could tell from the roof it was bent, as in ruined. I lost my mind on this guy, told him to get off the duckin' roof, followed him down and told him he was finished. I asked him what in his mind made him think firing 80-pound bundles of material onto a paving stone driveway was okay. He couldn't answer me. To anybody with common sense, get the stuff off the roof doesn't sound like throw it off the 2-story roof onto the driveway. $160 power tools included. Paid him cash for his time. Told him to hit the road. I'm sure he had it all blown within a couple hours on a nice rock to smoke. The paving stone driveway thankfully wasn't cracked. Asphalt shingles are made with tar though. There were black scuff marks on it. It took some finesse to clean up. As in, I got a jerry can of gas and had to use that to rub the marks out. I work in construction. The sheer volume of ducked-up stories I have to tell is enough to fill a book. I want to write someday when I'm old enough to retire. This was just one off the top of my head. Story 31. Hired a guy as a mechanic. He owned several of the type of cars our shop specializes in and did well in the interview. However, he quickly proved to have hobbyist-level skills. His productivity was slow. I always give new hires work on my own family vehicles or a shop vehicle before allowing them to work on a customer's car. In this case, he was given a front brake job on my stepson's older model. This is a gravy job, 30 minutes average. This guy took almost 2 hours, lost a part, started cross-threading a bolt, over-tightened a bolt till it broke not once but 3 times, and asked too many dumb duck questions. Finally, it was finished. I took it on an extended road test, including on the freeway. There was a scraping noise that wasn't going away. In fact, it started getting worse. Got it back to the shop, lifted it on the hoist to inspect the brakes, and found both the bolts holding on one of the brake calipers were totally loose. Like, didn't even try to tighten them loose. Only 2 turns or so. If one of them drops out, the caliper rotates out into the wheel and locks it up abruptly without warning, which on the freeway will make the car suddenly swerve to the right and tumble. My stepson was driving 450 miles back to college that night. I called the guy over to see what happened, and he looked like a guilty dog. With as much composure as possible, I explained the above to him and told him I had to let him go. He understood and packed his tools and was gone. The interesting thing was, a week or so later, his sister, who had never been there before, dropped off her brand of vehicle we specialize in and hadn't heard the news about her brother's employment demise. Without skipping a beat, she proceeded to leave her car anyway, dismissing the matter of her brother with a not surprising. Story 32. I was 13 and secured my first job at a pet supply company called Paws. After my first day, we were all done cleaning up the store, so we all milked the clock for the last 10 minutes sitting around chatting it up. The topic of my age came up and I told them I was only 13. I didn't know it was illegal at the time, and the job required you be 18 to work there because it was a warehouse environment. The next morning I came to work on time and was pulled into the office. I was told I couldn't work there because I was underage. I walked 3 miles home crying like a little git because I thought I was fired for underperforming. Story 33. I have a story where I had to fire a staff member on the Sunday before I started work. Year was 2006. When I first moved to London, UK from New Zealand, I got a job managing a taxi call center. I knew nothing about taxis. My previous experience was in managing retail and then banking call centers. Anyway, some investor had bought up a bunch of minicab companies and consolidated them into one professional office environment. So I got the job and was due to start on the Monday. I got a call from the founder who asked me if I could urgently drop into the office to sort something out. He was at some airport about to board a flight to London back from Thailand. He didn't give me any details, but I agreed to see what I could do to help. I arrive, and there is about 15 to 20 Eastern European drivers outside hanging around outside the office. They were obviously angry, upset about something, but they didn't know me. So I walked past and swiped my access card and went into the building. There was about 10 call center staff inside, some of who I had met as part of my interview process. So at least I was recognized, so they could answer my questions. Turns out that the drivers were upset that the dispatchers were giving all the more lucrative airport jobs to their friends, family, etc. I thought that's impossible because I was told that the system was automated and delivered the job to the nearest taxi. Basically, the system would automatically send a job to the driver's PDA. The driver would then accept the job, then drive to the pickup location to pick up the customer. The dispatcher was only required when something out of the ordinary happened. i.e., the system wouldn't allocate a job as well as a human, because it would simply allocate a job based on distance as the crow flies, rather than a more practical closest car by driving distance. I logged into the dispatch system and used the user guide, which was in badly translated English, and I finally found a report of jobs that were allocated. There was a column on the report indicating which car number the job was allocated to. There was another column indicated the job was manually changed from, say, car 42 to car 89. About 30% of the jobs that day had been manually changed. I wasn't 100% sure if this was suspicious or not, because, well, I knew nothing about the taxi industry. I needed more data. I was able to manually look up the car numbers and find the names of the drivers. I spent about an hour manually compiling a list that basically had cab numbers and driver names, and it basically looked like drop-off location, job allocated to, manual change to, Gatwick Airport, 23 Nowak, 99 Con Heathrow, 56 Kowalski, 11 Ahmed Heathrow, 78 Wisniewski, 45 Hussein Gatwick Airport, 12 Wojcik, 32 Ali Gatwick Airport, 1 Kowalczyk, 101 Akhtar. 99% of the airport jobs were clearly switched from names belonging to one ethnic group to another. Looks suspicious, I think. So I decide to confront one of the dispatchers. I sit down next to the dispatcher, who was about 30 years older than me and probably been a taxi dispatcher longer than I had been alive, and say, "Hey, so you know what's going on outside, right? I just want to hear what you thought about it." He immediately stands up, smashes his keyboard into the monitor. Bits of keyboard flew everywhere. The monitor didn't actually break. It was a massive old-school CRT monitor, and the keyboard was flimsy plastic. And he walked out and was promptly chased down the street about 20 meters and cornered by the drivers waiting outside. It was very dramatic, but amazingly no punches were thrown. The dispatcher was dragged back inside by the drivers, who managed to get into the office because one of them must have held the door from closing as the dispatcher made a run for it, and they demanded that I fire him on the spot or they would all quit. And faced with about 15 to 20 angry dudes with an old dispatcher in a headlock in the middle of a call center, I fired the dispatcher. Story 34. Security supervisor at a hospital. At the end of my first day, the girl relieving me comes in 37 minutes late. She didn't know I was going to be there, so she took her time getting there. She promises up and down that the next day she would be there on time. The next day, she is no call, no show. She was gainfully unemployed after that. Story 35. When I was working at this Japanese restaurant, we had to fire one of the new cooks his first day because he showed up drunk. I actually had to go pick him at the bus station because I was the delivery driver. When I pulled up there, I saw him finishing a tall boy of Bud Light. I was thinking, oh man, this might not be good. He got in the car and seemed okay. I offered him some gum and he accepted and thanked me. When we got to the restaurant, I didn't see much of him because I was back out in the front. But man, did I hear a lot. While the owner, Carol, and the other cooks were training him on what to do, he kept ducking up and knocking things over. Carol was an intense person and liked to berate people at first, but I have never seen her as mad as when this guy accidentally lit a rag on fire. "That was it," she screamed. "You're fired! Get the duck out!" She had me drive him back to bus station, which was one of the most awkward car ride I have ever had. Story 36. 40-something-year-old woman came in smelling of alcohol in a toy store for her first day as a seasonal employee. She threw up on herself in between helping customers. Story 37. Went to retrieve the new hire in the cafeteria, asked them to follow me out to the work area. Starting walking towards the door, they start to follow, then see someone they know sitting on the other side of the room. They walk away from me and proceed to have a conversation for 5 minutes. When they were done, they came back to me and said they were ready to go. I thanked them for coming in and showed them the door. Story 38. I ran one of those calendar kiosks in my local mall as a second job for holiday money. Hiring was done by a temp agency, located across the country, and the people sucked accordingly. 2 days after we opened, I was supposed to have a new guy to train. I got a call from him saying he'd been stabbed on the bus and was in the hospital. I asked him which hospital, and he told me. I have a buddy who worked for the local police department, and I had him make a call for me. No such person in the hospital and no stabbings on any bus line. I called the number I had for him, and his dad answered. I identified myself and explained that I was letting his son go from the job he had blown off. The dad was very polite, but as he hung up, I heard him screaming at his useless ducking son. Story 39. I had to fire someone while we were doing their new hire paperwork. The store manager interviewed him, then sent him to me, Ops manager, to do their papers. This kid starts majorly trash-talking the store manager, other employees, asking if any fine jeets work at the door. He then goes on to say, "Man, are you seriously having me fill out all this paperwork? You're about as retarded as the store manager." I said, Well, let's hold off on the paperwork then. I think we are going to go in a different direction with you, as you obviously are too professional for our business. It took him a second, but he then started acting like Eminem and crap talked the whole way out. See ya. Story 40. Not quite first day, but when I was in the Army, we had a soldier who came to the unit. Within about a week of his arrival, one of my good soldiers came and told me he'd been in the car with this new kid, and the new guy had started telling him about how cool it would be to pull out a gun and start shooting other drivers randomly. Bear in mind, this took place only a few months after the Nidal Malik Hassan massacre at Fet Hood. He was in the psych ward by the end of the day, and his separation paperwork that I had to complete was done by the next morning. I got my portion of the separation paperwork done by the next morning. That doesn't mean all the separation paperwork was complete. This wasn't a "that mother ducker cut me off, man, if I had my gun on me" type of thing. The dude straight up said how awesome it would be to just start killing people at random. Story 41. I worked at a large housing and counseling center for delinquent teenage boys. Usually about half of each new group of people hired didn't last more than a couple of weeks. They hired in waves and give them 2 weeks of training before they have them do much on the job work. However, the employee that topped them all was arrested during his first day of training. He was a vet with good references, seemed level-headed, etc. Great hire. Except during a training lecture, a bunch of ATF guys showed up and arrested him for selling lots of explosives and restricted weapons without a license or documentation. Story 42 wasn't a manager, but we had a kid who came into the shop, and his first day of night shift, they couldn't find him. Well, they found him after a few hours. He cleaned off a shelf in the parts room and was sleeping on it. Story 43. I work in a tobacco-free workplace, and the use of tobacco on the premises means instant termination. We all had to sign papers acknowledging that when we hired on. So some people get around it by walking around the back of the building into the parking lot behind us and technically getting around the "no smoking on the premises" clause. On his first day working there, a new guy would leave his station and walk to the back of the building or get in his car and drive off the lot to go smoke. Each trip would last him about 20 minutes, and he did this every hour. He was told to leave on his second day. I used to be a smoker when I hired on a few years ago, but because I was never a heavy smoker, a pack a week, and it was just too much trouble, I decided to quit completely. That was about 6 months ago, and still not missing it. Story 44. We had a teacher have a full breakdown on their first day. Started mumbling and rocking. We had to call the ambulance. Thing was, they had done some CRT work and passed the interview, reference check with flying colors. I guess this was the day they finally snapped. We had a cruddy quit after 2 periods, claimed the students were behaving like animals. Worst class ever, etc. So, as a senior staff member, I went over to the class to see what the duck was going on. Basically, nothing. I asked what the duck happened. The kids replied that the 2 diabetics were late to class as they were doing their sugar checks as required after lunch. The cart thought they were faking it. They showed her their pin cut and she said they were still lying. They were offended but settled down. Then the asthmatic kid started wheezing. From the stress, he asked to get his inhaler, and the CRT thought he was faking. Mind you, on her key, we have large color flashcards of all the kids with issues that we tell them to read. Asthmatic kid was a big, strong boy, so he basically barged past her at the door to get his medication. That sent the CRT off the deep end. I was like, what the heck? Story 45. He showed a relatively flat-chested girl in the office the results of his wife's breast augmentation on his phone and gave her the contact details of the plastic surgeon. Story 46. I worked my way up the ranks at one job. We did custom enterprise apps for the health and safety and insurance industries, so we had a few projects at a time. We had one project with one specific developer that was way over budget and well past any realistic delivery date. But the client was naive, the PM was shady, the CTO was senile, and this was at a time when any project in the insurance world took lifetimes to finish. This project should have taken 3 to 6 months and had ultimately taken 3 years. By the time I was promoted from else to acting toe, for reasons alluded to earlier, my first task was to get this project wrapped. So I called the developer and PM to a room and had finance and legal get me a copy of anything pertaining to this project, lay out what needs to be done to the team, and ask they get me any emails with the client that didn't include the previous CTO and a printed copy of the source, as it currently sits, mostly to get the dev out of the room because he yammers inanely constantly, sitting in the room with the PM talking about the project, while dev leaves to print, and I run across an odd adjustment on the project, on the dev's timesheet, and again on the PM's timesheet. When the project was about 6 months over deadline, there was some hubbub about getting more time, and so we'd apparently bumped the team's pay by no small amount until they finished the project, hourly, and with the only oversight being a senile old man. Did the math, and after the adjustment, we would have broken, even on the project had they finished it that quarter. That was 2 years ago. The company was bleeding money on this project, to these two who were effectively writing themselves blank checks. Dev finally comes in with the printed code, and as I'm reviewing it, won't stop making excuses about things I haven't even found yet. The code is a hot mess of spaghetti C, not C++, which was the company standard at the time. A huge stack of paper, but from what I could tell, very little actual code. Plenty of partial HTML strings and defines, not in any logical manner, mind you. Just entire pages of HTML sliced up about every 2,000 characters, because of the limitation on defined string lengths, some of which were valid enough if the application was even supposed to output HTML, but it wasn't. More half of them were the contents of tutorials or reference pages he used while writing the app. He cited the contents of the sources in their entirety in the source code. The rest was the documentation for the application, all in defined HTML*1 blah 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 format, chunked up every 2,000 characters or so. The actual code was barely a skeleton of what the application should be doing, and even that isn't enough to be a proof of concept. I laid out pretty clearly the state of the application was substantially subpar for the amount of time spent on it, and that we'd spend the rest of the day coming up with a timeline to get it done by the end of the quarter, about 2 months out by this time. I excused myself to get some materials, went by and talked to finance, legal, and HR. We concluded the state of the project could be taken as fraud in court, both from the client suing us and from us suing these two jackholes. HR boxed their stuff and cut their final checks as I worked out a timeline with them in the meeting room, while finance and legal came up with something to soothe over a naive but beyond patient client should things go sour the next day. The head of HR came in and handed me 2 packets, so I ended off my meeting by pushing the packets in front of them, saying, "Or we could just hire a contractor for 1/10 the price you two have milked the company for over 2 years and have it done by the end of the month. Here are your termination papers. Har has your things in the lobby. You're fired. Get out," called the client with the packet legal gave me. Paid them back more money than I want to remember and gave them a firm date for the application to hit functional beta, as we called it. Rifled through my stack of contractors we'd worked with in the past and made some calls. Had a couple guys who worked well together, lined up to come in the next day and finish the app in 6 weeks. Delivered on time, 2 years late. The legal was very torn about filing fraud charges against them. Thankfully, the rest of my time there was nowhere near as stressful, but unfortunately, no less facepalm-inducing. Greener pastures prevailed, and I've thankfully mostly avoided having to be a manager since pedantic debates between the meaning of supervisor and manager aside. Story 47. I was working as a waiter in a fancy restaurant. This classy guy shows up, well-dressed, well-mannered, looking for a job as a cook. They needed help back in the kitchen, so they hired him on the spot. Next morning, he shows up, drunk as duck. Not in a had a super night out with the buddies, I'm still a little hungover kind of way, but more in a just downed a bottle of whiskey for breakfast kind of way. He had watery eyes, awful breath. He stuttered, struggled to walk straight, but somehow managed to keep his head high. So management said, "Duck it, put him to work." The very first thing he does is grab a big prawn and manages to ducking hit his own finger with it. Right under the nail, lots of pain. Everybody is dumbfounded by this prowess. They immediately sent him home, maybe 10 minutes after he started his new job. Story 48. Friend of mine got a job at Chipotle as a cook. Got drunk the night before his first day and was hungover at work the next day. He threw up in the bathroom for most of his first shift. Didn't go back after that. Wasn't asked to come back. Story 49. I am a lifeguard, and we take 30-minute rotations with 15-minute breaks. My manager has once told me that a guy came in first day and fell asleep on his first rotation, so he was fired. Story 50. The only one I felt horrible about. I was training the guy, didn't do the firing. On his lunch break, he was caught walking out 2 rolls of toilet paper to his car, explained he couldn't afford any right now. Manager took the rolls, fired him on the spot. It's justifiable. If you'll steal TP, you'll steal something else. But dude, I would have let you borrow some cash to get by. If you asked Story 51, hired a girl to fire watch, which is where you literally sit still and make sure nothing sets fire while someone welds. Easiest job in the world. How do you duck it up? This girl gets 5 minutes into her first job, lays down on the ground, and goes to sleep. Not like she dozed off, she rolled up her jacket as a pillow and everything. On the ground, in the dirt, in the middle of our mill. Story 52. She couldn't figure out what the tab key was. It was a basic data entry job, literally. See the names and addresses written on this paper? Copy it exactly into our system. That's it. We went through an agency, which generally gives a software literacy test. Basic understanding of computers would be just fine. It's only data entry. She would stop typing after filling in a field, grab the mouse, and move it to the other field to type. We corrected her, "It's a lot faster and easier if you just push tab to move between the fields." Several times, she would stop typing, cover her face with her hands, and say, "Oh, this is too much. This is too hard." Every time it was suggested to use tab to move between fields, she also got up from her desk, with her trainer, manager sitting right next to her, and went into the bathroom to answer it every time her phone rang, 5 or so times throughout the day. The manager called the agency around noontime and told them we'd have her finish the day, but to ask her not to come back tomorrow. The agency called her right then and there on her cell phone. And of course, she got up and went into the bathroom to take the call. She came back out and sat down at her desk like she was going to work, but instead just looked at the manager and said, "Can I just leave now then?" So awkward. Story 53. I work at a hotel as an HR manager, and I have had to fire people for a wide range of reasons. Most of the time, it is for the normal stuff like the person is unreliable or incompetent, or they have messed up the money. But this one guy, who I will refer to as Dennis from here on out, was a special case. Dennis lasted 3 days with the hotel before being fired for theft, harassment, substances use, and assault. Our story begins with Dennis's first shift when our front office manager was explaining the cash handling policy to him. As soon as Dennis hears he will be responsible for money, he asks how much and is informed $500. He then immediately asks what our policy is if the front desk is robbed, which sets off some red flags. Our FOM decided not to entrust Dennis with a bank very quickly. Later on, one of our other desk agents come in to work the evening shift, and Dennis decided that she was totally his type. He then proceeds to hit on her aggressively and ask her out, as well as trying to get her number. She tells him duck off, and at the end of his shift, he goes home. She tells me and the manager, and we decide to give him a warning the next day. Not satisfied with being an annoyance before, Dennis decided to step up his game on day 2. After getting lectured on harassment and written up when he comes in for training, he starts asking some more questions, one of which was, "Where do I find the employee directory in case I need to contact someone with a question?" He then proceeds to copy down every number with a female name attached to it and spam them with junk pics from his secondary phone with the message, "Trying to find a room and duck." Nobody knew it was his phone at the time, so it went under the radar. The rest of his shift was fairly unremarkable. Day 3, judgment day. It begins fairly unremarkably, but then I go out back to have a cigarette with another manager. Lo and behold, we find Dennis out back smoking. We ask him if he was actually smoking, and rather than deny it, he responds, "Totally, you dudes want to hit?" We then explain that he has violated company policy and to head inside so we can begin termination procedures. We go through the paperwork and tell him to grab all of his stuff and leave, and we would mail him his check. As he goes to grab his bag, he picks up the FOM's laptop from her desk and puts it in his bag. He then turns around to find me standing there, decks me in the face, and tries to run. Winds up crashing into our engineer, who held him down until the cops came to pick him up, while they were going through his bag to make sure he hadn't stolen anything else. We found the phone he had been sending banana pics from, 2 ounces of substances, and a bunch of paraphernalia, and so ended Dennis' employment at our property. Story 54. Not first day, but close. We have a very competitive college intern program where I work. So, young guy comes in and proceeds to sleep, and I mean head back, mouth agape, for half the day. I work in an open office, but he was in a weird corner where you couldn't really see him unless you were looking specifically at his area. So, those of us around him were stunned and not sure what to do. Day 2, he does the same. Day 3, same thing. Only this time a high-level manager came by to chat with me. He literally stopped mid-sentence when he glanced over and saw Sleepy. Seriously, was all he said. He apologized and said he had to have a talk with HR. Dude was gone within 20 minutes. Story 55. One woman didn't even make it to the interview. She came to the office and was told to wait in the hallway for the manager to call for her. She promptly started to wander around the office, peeking into rooms, people's screens, and randomly pick up and examine stuff. Story 56. I have a story. Although I was the employee at the time, I'd been laid off from a hospital job I'd had for 6 years. Put applications out Domino's is the first to call back, so I go for the interview and the manager guy hires me. I tell him, though, that I need a spot working inside the store and not delivery, as my car isn't reliable at the moment. He says, no problem. I do the training and it's my first day on the job. I show up and I'm told to go on a few deliveries with one of the drivers in their car. Okay. After we deliver a few pizzas, the manager says, okay, time for you to head out on your own. I remind him about our discussion about how I can't do deliveries at the moment, and he just says, well, drivers are what I need. If you can't do that, then I'll have to let you go. Come to find out, my friend's wife worked there and at the time was cheating on him with the manager. She recognized me during training and apparently told him he can't work here. He might find out about us and tell my husband. Story 57. I'm an employee who was fired on my first day. I got a job in a deli and worked one day from 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. I was then told that it wouldn't work out. I had received almost no training at all that day and was left on my own to serve customers at one point. I didn't have the guts to say anything and just let it go. Story 58. Worked for a big bookstore chain. Fired this guy who thought it would be funny to cancel a 5-year-old girl's ship to home order of Paddington and replace it with the fine art of fisting. Luckily, the employee was a big enough idiot to brag about it. We got the order replaced, and the family was never the wiser. Firing him was actually infuriating, as he didn't see how he did anything wrong. Story 59. The store manager hired a guy contingent on his background credit check. He had bad credit, and the same manager made me fire him. So I told him his checks came back bad. He said, "That should have been sealed." Turned out that he had a forgery conviction, which was in fact sealed. He laughed when I told him it was just bad credit. 3 or 4 weeks later, just as I was leaving the company, the company dropped the credit check, and the store manager, in spite of my warnings, hired the guy again. He passed the check this time. 2 weeks they caught him stealing computers. Story 60. This duckin' Aussie named Peter, not on his first day though, but his third. He kept drinking tall boys at lunch, which actually wouldn't have been a problem if he hadn't been drinking them at his desk. Warnings after lunch on day 1 and 2, and I warned him again before lunch on the 3rd day. And he immediately went and started drinking one at his desk, so I had to let him go. He slung his man bag over his shoulder, raised his can and said, "Party, mate," and walked out the door. I watched him ride his bike away with no hands, drinking his beer. Once he got out to the main road, he immediately strayed too far into traffic, got hit by a car, and broke his collarbone. Employers of Reddit. What are your crazy employee stories? Story 1. A few years ago, I was a kitchen manager at a place in Charlotte, North Carolina. I don't know if it is common knowledge or not, but substances used in kitchens is very common and most of the time accepted. That being said, I had a line cook who had come in tweaked out on substances. He came to me, explained the situation, apologized, asked if he could run somewhere and come in a little later in better shape. It was slow and most of the prep was done, so I said he could have an extra hour. He comes back 45 minutes later and is calmed down, stopped shaking, and had a grin on his face. He was one of my better line cooks, so I was glad to see that I didn't have to reprimand him. We begin the dinner service, and everything is running smoothly when I look across the line, and he begins to look as if he's falling asleep while working the grill. He assured me that he was fine. 15 minutes goes by, and I see him collapse, landing with his face and arm on the grill. He didn't even wake up. I run across the kitchen and push him off, skin literally melted to the grill. As he hits the ground, he wakes up and simply says, "Oh crap, chef, may I go to the hospital?" The smell was horrific. At 7 p.m. on a Friday night, we closed the restaurant, opened all the doors and windows, and cleaned up the mess. We bought new plates for the grill, don't worry. As I'm doing my order for the next day around 10 p.m., he comes back in, bandaged up, and says, "Chef, can I help with anything?" Astonished, I couldn't reply. And he continued to explain that he went to his dealer's house and got a crap ton of OxyContin, snorted it so he could calm down, and he just nodded out. "Oh, but it's okay, they gave me medics so I can still work. And I'm a git, so don't worry about workers' comp. I just want to still have a job." 2 weeks later, he returned to work, sober and hasn't touched a substances or had a drink since. I arranged so that his hospital bills were paid, but he had no paid time off. One of the best employees and craziest mother duckers I will ever meet. Edit. After seeing how much you guys liked this story, I contacted him. It's been about 3 years. He met his now fiancée at an NA meeting, expecting a daughter in a few months, and was just called about becoming the sous chef at a restaurant opening in Atlanta. He moved there because he said that. Charlotte was too dangerous for him, and there were too many haunting memories. Thank you guys so much. It makes me proud. He cried thanking me on the phone when I told him about this, and I would have probably not done so if it weren't for this. Thank you from the both of us. Story 2. There was this lady at my first job out of college who would sneak away into the lunchroom, which was in the basement of the building, and steal lunches. She'd go through all of them, taking bites or eating it all. If she took a bite of something she didn't like, she'd throw it in the garbage. Staff would come downstairs to find their lunches devoured or in the trash with one bite taken out of it. This all came to a head one day when some guy was up in arms after his meatloaf sandwich fell victim to the lady lunch thief. He ended up catching her, she was fired, and keyed everyone's cars. Story 3. I work as a supervisor in a substances store. One night, one of my employees was seen just letting someone walk out with hundreds of dollars of merchandise. A few minutes later, he went outside to collect the shopping carts. I'm reviewing the video evidence of this happening at the time and on the phone with my store manager. The employee was outside for a pretty decent amount of time. I hadn't noticed right away because I was busy collecting the evidence, but my other cashier called me up and told me that he still hadn't come back in 15 minutes later. As I walked downstairs, he comes back inside with one shopping cart, and the guy was high as a kite. Because I am not a store manager, my hands are rather tied as far as what I am able to do at the time, so I just send him home and keep someone else for the rest of the night. The employee called me later. I happened to be best friends with his sister, and he started talking about how he hates snitches and that people should just leave other people alone. He was rambling on and on. The next day, the loss prevention manager was there, as well as my manager. The employee was terminated. It turned out that he would let his friends walk out with baskets of merchandise without scanning it. Then he would go to collect carts, and they would give him meth in payment for all the stuff. He thought he had this master plan, and that he was sticking it to the man. It was really sad to see. Since then, the employee has been incarcerated and successfully completed rehab. I'm glad to say that he is doing so much better now and has apologized profusely about the entire incident. Story 4. I work in video games. These stories happened many years ago when working in video games was one step lower on the embarrassment to your parents scale than being a roadie. When I started at the company, we were independent and small. The company grew much bigger and got bought by a larger company, but back then it was staffed by anyone they could find that would be willing to move to that location, knew something about the game we were working on, and had a modicum of customer service experience. Keep in mind that we had former Starbucks baristas, guys who worked at 7-Eleven, and a guy that gave us good service at Denny's. Once we'd take anyone that had a reasonable attitude and a willingness to work. The industry is different now, but these are a few stories. Some of them have changed in shape over the years, logically, but I'll try to be as true to reality as possible. The game we worked on was an MO. This particular employee received his job as recompense for turning in a particularly heinous dupe bug. Dupe bugs in MMOs can ruin the entire economy rapidly, and this guy turned it in. The CIS manager hired him, but did not really vet the guy. A couple weeks into the guy's employment, and we found that his work ethic was incredible. The guy was the first guy in the office and the last one to leave. We found out that he was not actually leaving, but sleeping under his desk. We had to make a rule that you had to go home after your shift. I also had someone who, when fired, dropped his pants in the middle of the C's pit and pinched one off. Cleanup. Aisle 3. But the best story of that entire experience was the keymaster. This is a guy who had moved out from the East Coast to work at this company. He had a girlfriend who moved with him. Maybe they met there, I can't quite remember. And there was something not quite balanced about him. But he wanted to work there so bad and worked really hard to get a job. So we started him out on phones instead of as a GM, game master, not general manager. He did reasonably well until one day his lead discovered that he'd been creating in-game money and using it effectively to pay his rent. His landlord played the game he worked on, and every action a GM takes is logged. And it was discovered that he had been, in effect, cheating. He gets called into the CS manager's office, a man who, then, was not known for his warm and fuzzy personality, although now he's mellowed out a lot. When he is confronted with the evidence of his wrongdoing, the guy begins to hyperventilate and rock back and forth in his chair. He works himself up into a frenzy and smashes his head back against the wall in his rocking fit. Unfortunately, there's a whiteboard behind him and the marker ledge is at just the right height. So as he smashes back, it splits the back of his head open and blood shoots up the wall. The CIS manager, taken aback, tells him to calm down and mellow out. Through the next few minutes, the guy ends up jumping up and throwing himself to the ground and beating his head against the ground, muttering to himself about how stupid he had been and begging for his job. Someone went to call the cops and the guy starts to calm down a bit. He is informed he has to leave. The guy gets his keys out of his pocket, looking as though he's preparing to leave. He affixes them in his fist with a key poking between his fingers and then begins to stab himself in the chest with every ounce of strength he has with the key. The CIS manager prepares to physically restrain him until the cops arrive, but the guy starts to calm himself before throwing the keys at one of the leads who was also present, narrowly missing his face. Long story short, the guy left and ended up moving back east, and the game got a new NPC, the Key Master. To this day, many of us keep keys in our office next to our monitors, just in case we get fired. It was an amazing place to work. Many of the people from those days have gone on to leadership positions at some of the top game companies in the world. It was trial by fire, and most people got burned. But the ones that didn't have really gone on to some great things. I miss that company some days. And then I remember that the fire really sucked. We once had someone who stole an entire computer, one part at a time. Like, you'd show up to work and your computer was super slow, and it turns out one of the sticks of RAM in your computer was gone, or a keyboard, or a video card. Like, stuff you would notice. His roommate found the parts all under the sink in the bathroom and turned him in. The roommate was part of the internal security team. It was a crazy place. I'm surprised they didn't just fire us all for spite. Story 5. Worked at a new fries that opened in my old town a number of years back. It was pretty bad initially, and they really overworked employees. The turnover was huge, and later, a suit was filed against this specific fries. In any case, when I started, there was a blonde woman who I forget her name now. Let's call her Beth. Beth was overly enthusiastic to the point of being incredibly annoying to any and every employee, customer. Beth was apparently also a pathological liar and frequently left her shifts early to do God knows what. When she was fired, she came back with a nice purple present, all wrapped up with a white bow and everything. It was meant to be an apology to the manager, but she quickly dropped it off and took off, saying she was busy. It smelled like it had been doused in a gallon of perfume, but she seemed half crazed, so whatever. The manager for her department at the time took it and opened it near the registers. Inside was a lump of crap. She crap in a box and gave it to her manager. As a gift, of course. Story 6. This was years ago, probably a decade or so. I used to be a manager at a crafty taco place and asked one of our crafty high school employees to take the trash out at the end of the shift. After counting the money, it occurred to me that my crafty employee still had not come back inside. I peeked out the back door and saw him railing some crafty tubby girl on top of the drive-through speaker. I didn't know what to say. We locked eyes. He kept wrecking her crafty pussy. It was awkward, but fairly alpha on his part. Credit where credit is due and all. I never saw him again. I just went back inside and he never came back in the back door, though presumably he did come in the back door, if you know what I mean. Story 7. Bob. Not his real name. Bob lasted 2 weeks, which was about 2 weeks longer than he should have. During orientation, he challenged me on several of our rules, many of them having to do with health and safety. He did not want to wear eye protection or closed-toed shoes since it was too hot in our climate-controlled manufacturing plant. He wore a Bluetooth headset, which he proceeded to answer several times. Through orientation and when informed that personal cell phones use was only permitted during scheduled breaks, he informed me that he was conducting business and needed it. This was when I decided Bob needed to go. However, HR and the company president also needed to sign off on it, and after 3 hours decided I had not given him a fair shake. Bob was untrainable. He had one job to do: balance material in a centrifuge and make sure it was draining. We had charts posted outlining how many of what to put in and how to arrange things. So after working with him a day, showing him and overseeing him arrange, and balance was satisfied that I could leave him unattended for 5 minutes while I grabbed a washroom break. I was dead wrong. I start to hear the clanking of metal on metal and ran back to shut down the machine to find that it was not loaded or balanced properly. When asked why he loaded it against regulation, he said, "It takes too long to arrange everything." Still, nobody wants to get rid of him except me. So, as the GM of a manufacturing plant, I spent the next week with Bob, babysitting him as he loaded a centrifuge until I finally had to leave him to do my actual job. In under a half hour from improper loading, he had damaged the machine. While I was loading, setting up the backup, I instructed him to go to the boardroom to review the loading charts and that I would call him back. When I was finished about 20 minutes later, I go to the boardroom. No Bob. There's nobody in the men's room. As I am walking back to my production floor, I notice that there is somebody in the president's office. This is pretty strange, since the president is out of the office that day, and the only two people who are permitted in the office are myself and the office manager. Wouldn't you know it, just down the hall, the office manager is happily chugging away at some reports in her office. So I go in only to reveal Bob watching some of the most depraved Spanish adult film on the president's computer. While I didn't have the power to, I terminated him on the spot and cleared it with H and the president later, who, a quick viewing of his browser history, agreed that it was justified. Apparently, Bob didn't know how to browse incognito. Bob has since filed a case with HRSDC for wrongful dismissal. Story 8. We have this one relatively crazy woman that works in her shop. She's got a son who, at the time of this story, was around 18. This woman decides that her son needed some experience with an older woman, so she actually went to one of the women in our accounting department and asked her if she'd be interested in having sex with her son because she wanted his first time to be with someone experienced. I crap you not. I was sitting outside our HR person's office when the complaint was filed. Story 9. In my particular case, I'm on the opposite side of the fence on this one. When I was 16, all I wanted was a sport bike. I thought they were straight up the coolest thing ever. Going Mach 5 on one wheel was like all I could think about. Of course, I was broke, so I needed a job. Bring on Albertsons. For those of you who don't know, Albertsons is like a grocery store chain. Anyway, 3 days into my job, they put me on customer service, a job that is only supposed to be for people who are 21 and up. Big mistake on their part. Here's another kicker. They didn't train me on anything. I barely knew how to work their crappy computer system, and even with that, I had no idea how their policies on returns work. Anyways, Few hours go by, and I hadn't burned down the building and there were no customers in an uproar yet. So things were looking good. In comes old a hole Gary. Gary wants to return to Albertsons a pair of New Balance shoes that look like they are 25 years old and have been worn every day since their creation. Now, I'm no grocery store guru, but I know for a fact we don't sell shoes at this particular location. So I politely inform the guest that he may be in the wrong store. I'm thinking maybe this guy is senile or something. He gets insanely furious that I won't accept the return of his product and demands to see my manager. I internally laugh thinking this is going to be good. So my manager, a Hispanic lady, very sweet lady, comes out and gets the situation. She looks at me like I've just approved the launch codes for a nuclear strike on an orphanage full of kittens. I'm a little stunned at her reaction, and she promptly gives the man a card that is good for $45 store credit and accepts the shoes. She turns to me and basically chews me out and says that it's their policy to accept all returns if the customer is unsatisfied, apparently even for things we don't even sell. What the heck? So over the next week or so, I start accepting all sorts of returns, and most of them are regular returns, but once or twice a week, I get some ducking, ridiculous return by some customer with a crap-eating grin on their face because they know they are just working our retarded system. Honestly, if some a hole tried to return his car, I'd do it. I would ducking do it. People would return like giant hams that they forgot and left in their car in 2,000-degree Florida heat for a week and ask for a return for a brand new one. Sure enough, I'm forced to give them one. Then I start noticing a pattern. It's roughly the same 8 to 9 people I see effectively returning miscellaneous crap they probably found in their garage just before heading out to Albertsons so they can fund their groceries for the week. I eventually snapped when some guy tried to return like hardware tools, and because he had the audacity to get that I wasn't giving him the amount he paid for, I lost it. I demanded he show me where in this forsaken establishment we sold even one ducking tool. He seemed stunned and eventually got my manager. I quit. About 4 months later, Albertsons went out of business. Go ducking figure. Only time I've quit my job, or was about to get fired anyway. Figured I'd post here. Story 10. As an officer in the USAF, I was responsible for keeping plenty of crazy employees in line. As you enlist, you belong to the government. As an 05, I was in charge of you. I had one E3 that was bat crap insane. He was in the Army and stationed at Fort Detrick. This grunt was obviously bipolar. No idea how he made it this far. I'll give you just one example. We had muster at 6 a.m., and he shows up covered in mud, raging like he just shot himself full of bull steroids and MDMA. He mumbles something like, "I just ran 4 miles, sir. Ready for 4 more." He was filthy, beet red, and had the eyes of a rabid dog. Apparently, he went into an extreme high and woke up at 4 a.m. and ran 4 miles through the muddy woods. He went on to serve 24 years before he retired at a higher rank than me. Story 11. I was a manager of a couple departments for a local grocery chain a few years ago. I had a girl on one of my teams who was terminated for basically breaking every rule in the book. She sucked, even though I wasn't the one who fired her or made the decision. I didn't have that power. She decided to take revenge on me. A week after her termination, I started getting calls on my cell phone from strange men wanting to have sex. Turns out, she made a fake listing on Craigslist, soliciting me for sex. I'm a woman. After much digging and convincing one of the strange dudes to assist me with getting evidence, I was able to make a police report. It's a 2-year felony to impersonate someone online, solicit them without permission, in Michigan at that time. The fun part is when the police wouldn't press charges because it was a one-time thing. Yep, this girl endangered me by offering me for sex on Craigslist with my personal cell phone number, but it was a one-time thing. I'm still pissed. Story 12. I had a coworker once who was just ridiculous. First, he was a newly arrived immigrant from Senegal, so some of this is probably cultural differences. 1. He didn't shower. Seriously. This was at a summer camp, so we were there 24 hours a day. He didn't shower. 2. In lieu of showering, he just used Axe body spray. Lots of it. Yes, this was when we were in high school. 3. Similarly, he did not brush his teeth. Instead, he used mouthwash probably 4 or 5 times a day. He had a little bottle of it that he carried in his pocket. Story 13. We own a salvage yard, junkyard, and we usually have a few cats around. Every now and then, one of these cats will claim us and live in the office. We feed it, take it to the vets, and it becomes our junkyard pet cat. One particular cat was awesome, and all the guys loved this cat. Even the burly guys. They would all share their lunches with the cat. This one guy that used to work for us was a hole. One day he decided that he didn't like the cat anymore. He took a can of spray paint and painted the poor kitty, all over head to tail. When the cat came into the office, my husband, who was the boss, went ballistic. The first thing my husband did was wash the cat off as best as he could. Then, he went into the shop and raised Holy hell. Screaming at everyone until a new guy finally told him that he saw Jim spray paint the cat. My husband was raging and wanted to really duck this guy up bad, but instead called the cops and filed animal cruelty charges and fired him on the spot. This guy had the balls to file for unemployment for unlawful termination. He was denied several times but kept opposing the judgment. We fought his argument all the way to the highest level of state review, where he was granted full unemployment benefits. The reason was, even though he broke the law while at work, it didn't state in our handbook, no spray painting of cats, or no unlawful activities at the workplace. We thought that would have been a given. The guy finally got his though, kind of. He's serving a year in jail for fleeing from the police while drunk. The cat lived for several more years. One guy would always come in on Sunday to feed her, and he found her dead. She had died in her sleep, in the box, filled with blankets that they kept for her. Story 14, I was working at Get Fiddle Center, right out of high school. The turnover rate at a store like that is pretty high. If I remember correctly, I saw 70 new hires in the 2 years I worked there. One guy we hired lasted less than a day. He was introduced to everyone, but on that day, every register was occupied. So he was sent into our warehouse to help them do stocking and to learn the computer system. However, as I found out later, it was pretty evident that he was at the very least functionally illiterate. So the warehouse manager gave the guy an X-Acto knife and had him go bust down cardboard boxes. However, after about an hour or so, he couldn't be found. The events that follow I was not directly witness to, just told about after the fact. After searching for this man for a while, he was discovered sitting in a pile of gig bags at the top of one of the warehouse shelves, about 15 feet off the ground, singing softly to himself, smiling broadly, with tears on his face, and hitting his wrists. From where I was, all I knew was that the GM and a couple of the AMs got paged to the warehouse, and soon after we heard sirens in our parking lot. The GM, a guy with a bit of a temper, was heard yelling very loudly in his office right afterward. Though who he was yelling at, I don't know. Never saw that kid again. Story 15, I work at an East Coast gas station that sells made-to-order food. Most people who call out of work will give some type of legitimate excuse as to why they can't come in, they are sick, etc. One Friday night, a third shifter's called to say he wasn't coming in that night. His reason? I have a life, and hung up. Story 16. Employee asked to have Friday off to watch a big darts contest. Failed to give nearly enough notice, but what the hell? Okay. Phones the boss at home Sunday. I'm through to the third round, which is on Monday. Can I have Monday off? You said you were going to watch a darts contest? Well, yeah, but I wasn't expecting to get past the first round. Then I would have been watching after that. Can I have tomorrow off? No, you're needed. It's too short notice. Oh, okay. Doesn't turn up for work on Monday. In the evening, his girlfriend rings up. Paul's made it through to the fourth round, tomorrow. He asked me to call and say he can't be at work tomorrow. Sorry, but if he isn't at work tomorrow, 8 a.m., he needn't bother turning up at all. Doesn't come to work Tuesday. Turns up 8 a.m. Wednesday and seems genuinely surprised. When he is told to get lost, he's fired. Story 17, I worked at a car wash and I swear this is dome final destination crap. Friend was pressure washing the inside of the tunnel, where all the machines are to clean the cars, and was about halfway through, about 125 feet long or so, the tunnel. The buzzer went off as to indicate a car was being sent through the wash. The car is in neutral and is sent along a conveyor belt chain that pop up rollers to keep the car at constant speed. Well, he hears the buzzer and starts to make his way back towards the front, staying out of the way of the spinning cloth wrap spinning. Well, the pressure wash hose, it has intertwined steel, so it is strong, starts to get wrapped up in the wraps, and he is trying to pull it out, and somehow it caught his leg, and he was stuck. He spun around with the wrap until it stops to wait for the sensor to start it again for when the car gets closer. Once it started again, he found something to hold on to, so it got his leg even more messed up because the wraps are spinning and he is not. The car slowly moves closer and runs over his hand, and finally someone realizes he is stuck. The equipment is really loud and stops the track. He has scars from the pressure of the hose to this day. The firefighters had to be called and cut him out with the jaws of life because the hose was so strong. Broke his ankle and had to get 2 plates and 6 screws in his foot. Here's a few more. Another story is in a comment below. An older lady came in and got her car done and left. Next thing we hear a metal scratching sound and look over and it's her. And she rode her car over a raised median that splits a 4-lane entrance to the shopping center the wash is at. I thought to myself, what the hell is she thinking? She then turned and merged into traffic. So I looked away. 3 to 4 seconds later, hear a huge crash. Ran over to see what happened, and she didn't turn into traffic. She turned into the grass between the road and the wash, and she drove into the building. Come to find out, she had a diabetic seizure and passed out. We finally got the door unlocked and she had no idea what happened. Next one, I was wiping down a car and see an older couple pull onto the lot park in the corner by the curb. The older gentleman got out and walked around the car. He had breathing tubes. I looked up again just in time to see him fall backward and hit his head hard on the curb. I ran over to see if he was okay. I stayed with him as I called the ambulance and made sure he was stable till the ambulance came. Story 18. This was a few years ago. I was working at a cell center as a supervisor in charge of transitioning agents from training to the floor. I had a team of 6 agents below me that handled most of the immediate agent interaction. So I could deal with administrative tasks, monitoring agents, passing each agent off to their permanent supervisor, writing documentation, etc. Most agents were under my supervision from 2 weeks following training and released once they were deemed as ready. We went through a massive hiring phase where we added 200 agents in less than a month. This meant I had 1/3 of the entire call center under me during the night shift. I had pulled every string I could to reinforce my team of 6 agents and had maybe 15 agents helping. During this, someone felt that they weren't getting enough help, and I was directly at fault for letting them fail while on the floor. Instead of speaking to me, my agents, or anyone else, they took a rather immature approach. They found me on MySpace, copied all of my pictures, attempted to add all of my friends, and wrote about how awful of a person I was, how much I enjoyed ruining people's lives, and how much I enjoyed specific activities. After this occurred, a few dozen of my friends reported the fake profile, which was quickly taken down, and MySpace was henceforth blocked within the firewall. Unfortunately, I was unable to ascertain who had done this, nor if there was a specific incident which caused this resentment. Story 19. Here's a couple. I was training at a gas station. First hour was the normal rush and everything went normally. When the crowd died down, we started to settle in and I started going through the normal routine with him. As we're talking, he pulls out a knife that's several inches over the legal limit and a stone and starts sharpening the knife. I immediately say, "You need to put that back in your car now and never bring it to work with you again." Carrying a concealed and illegal weapon is grounds for immediate termination if security or management sees that. His response, "Oh, okay." He starts walking to his car, presumably to drop the knife off, and then he drives away, never to be seen again. At my current job, we had 2 back-to-back. The first person we hired appeared to be a godsend. She was very comfortable around computers, and by day 2 already was well on her way to having her own routine for the day mapped out. She was picking up on her job far, far faster than anyone in recent memory. Then her boyfriend calls the school she was assigned to. Who the duck is manager's name? Why the duck is his name in my woman's phone? Don't give me that bull crap that she's not available. Put her on the ducking phone now or I'll go down there and drag her ass out. This caused the lockdown of the school for obvious reasons. She was called into the admin building and asked to give information on her boyfriend, since authorities were interested in pressing charges. Her response? Totally nonchalant. "Oh, don't mind him. He gets like that from time to time. Just don't press charges, please. If he violates his parole again, he'll be back in jail." She was immediately fired. Don't know if they ended up pressing charges against the boyfriend. So now we're on the hunt for a replacement for her. Her replacement was a middle-aged woman, spoke English and Spanish. Her attire appeared to be a mixture of religious and cultural garb. Nothing extravagant, but a bit over the top. She was a deeply religious woman, but didn't appear to let that spill into her work, at least not on the first day anyway. The school manager was out on the second day for a personal day. She came back to find almost everything in her office thrown into boxes, stuffed into a closet, and replaced with various religious pictures, trinkets, statuettes, etc. The office looked like the Vatican. So she goes and looks for the new hire, who was found in a faculty bathroom sobbing, "Only God can help me now." She had to be taken away by local police. Don't know what happened to her either. Story 20. I'm just an employee, but this was the craziest thing that's ever happened while I was working. To give some context on the stupidity of the person, the story below revolves around. He drove off after work on more than 3 occasions without noticing the car topper was still on top of his car. I could understand if it was a big truck, as it's not right at eye level as you are walking to your car. Anyone familiar with Jimmy John's Customer Appreciation Day knows that the $1 subs for the short 4-hour time period causes every store to be extremely packed. The one I was working at in particular made about 1,400 sandwiches during that 4-hour time period. The main character of this story was an idiot who was just a bad delivery driver, as he could never remember direction. A delivery order came in while the dollar subline was wrapped well out the door. The order was to go deliver a couple sandwiches and drinks to the auto dealership that was only 1/2 mile, if that, down the road. As it is the most hectic time you could ever imagine working, no one really notices he has been gone on that really short delivery for almost 45 minutes. That is, until the lady who placed the order called asking where the hell her food was. So I told her that we would send someone else out with fresh sandwiches. Within 5 minutes, she called back saying that the original delivery driver had showed up. At this point, I grabbed the owner who was in line at one of the cold tables making sandwiches. He came over and apologized again for the lateness of the order and told her to send the driver back and wait a couple minutes for the fresh order to get to her. So, because we are so busy, the owner just hops back in line to make sandwiches. I'm thinking in my head, I can't wait to see this idiot get chewed out by the owner who loves to overreact. Boy, was I disappointed at first. The driver came back inside, worming through the sea of people, and comes back and is signaled by the owner to come over to him. He didn't blow up in a tirade and just quietly said something to the driver. He didn't even send him home. A little while goes by and I'm looking around the horde of people in line and see a cop and think, what kind of bull is that? Getting food in the slowest possible way on the taxpayer's dime? Then I see the cashier go grab the owner instead of ringing up an order. The owner points out the driver who the cop grabs by the arm and escorts outside and proceeds to press face first against the giant glass windows that are the front of the store as he handcuffs him. The cops put him in the back of their car and proceeded to dig through the idiot driver's car, which was full of a bunch of crap. Boxes, multiple hampers of dirty clothes, just random trash and crap. It took a while, but they finally found something and drove away with the guy. Later on, from my manager, I found out that the driver was like 8 miles away from where the delivery was supposed to go, outside of our delivery range as well. And he hit 2 cars and fled the scene with a Jimmy John sign on the top of his car. And it turns out, what the cops found in the car was a small baggie of CK. Never saw that incompetent idiot again. Story 21. I'm not the employer, but I worked with a real winner. I worked in a warehouse with this guy who was quiet and had a weird aura about him. Since we stood next to each other all day, I kind of became friendly with the guy. And he was cool with me, but he didn't like anyone else, and nobody liked him much either. Anyway, this guy's girlfriend also happened to work for us on the night shift, and she was also weird, but most people there liked her. One day, this guy comes into work, and he is acting weirder than usual. He's very cagey and paranoid. We were talking, and he tells me that he was out drinking last night, and he got into an argument with some guys he knows, and he is worried that they will find him and kick his ass. I told him he was overthinking it and not to worry. Anyway, right before lunch, he comes to me and asks me if I can do him a favor, and I say sure. He asked me if I can give him a ride down the street to get something to eat, but then he tells me that the guys who wanted to kick his ass last night are outside in a car waiting for him to come out, and he asks if I wouldn't mind pulling my car to the bay door in the warehouse so he can jump in real quick without them seeing him. I do all this, and he jumps in my car and lays low like he is trying to hide under the seat. Anyway, I take the guy down the street, and he says thanks and says he will walk back to work. So I just left, grabbed some food, and brought it back to my desk. 5 minutes after I get back and sit down at my desk, the local police department storms the building surrounding every doorway and searching our warehouse top to bottom, looking for this guy. The detective on the scene asked where he was, and I told him I just dropped him off down the street, and he said okay. The cops left after an hour or so, and I'm talking with the detective, and I ask why they are looking for him, and he says that the guy tried to hit another guy last night with a shotgun. I'm like, wow, that's nuts. Can you tell me more? And he tells me that this guy hacked into his girlfriend's email and found emails from other guys wanting to meet with her. And from the wording of a couple of those emails, it sounded like she was ducking many different guys around town. He also said that my crazy coworker would reply to these emails pretending to be the girlfriend and got one of the guys to meet him behind a local shopping center under the pretense that it was the girlfriend to be, and they would duck. My coworker gets this guy to show and proceeds to empty as many shells as he could into this guy's car. But he didn't hit the guy. They later found him hiding in his mom's house and arrested him without incident. Story 22. I've had a few crazies over the years. Let's start by saying that at my bookstore, the general manager is so anti-confrontational that you have to basically wig out completely on a customer to get fired. She is also a horrible judge of character, so we had, and have, some real winners on staff. Past crazies? Names changed, although who really cares? Darlene, older woman in her late 50s, early 60s. One of those employees that is slightly annoying because she can't seem to remember how to do anything, but generally isn't too bad. Then she starts showing off the gun that she keeps in her purse on the sales floor, in a town where there really is no need to carry a gun 24 hours a day. David, foreign guy from South America who was going to the local university for a law degree. He would corner the petite music manager and declare his undying love for her. He was a huge partier and came in one morning talking about how he had to get his car's wheel fixed because he was driving home, got a flat tire, and didn't want to stop, but couldn't figure out why there were sparks coming from it. Idiot was driving on his rim. He also did coke and did some on the clock. Chris, your classic creeper, pedo glasses, slightly overweight, bad comb-over, told everyone that he was ex-Black Ops, that he had written a book that had been picked up by Tor, but wouldn't be published that year because they didn't want to compete with Harry Potter, and that he was getting offers to write some screenplays. He harassed every female on staff, despite all of us telling the general manager, was eventually fired after threatening to kill a guy who was browsing the sports section because he put a book back in the wrong spot. Story 23. I am the owner of a small hip-hop clothing and accessory, also body piercings, stuff like that. Anyways, had this one girl who at first was a fantastic employee, punctual, friendly, and intelligent. One day she showed up to work a mess, smelled like a mixture of sweat and urine. Immediately, I wanted her to go home, but I decided she was having a bad day and didn't want to make it any worse. On this particular day, she was quiet and hiding her face, making no eye contact at all. After about 3 hours of dealing with her terrible attitude, I politely told her she can go home for today and have the rest of the week off. I wasn't firing her. I really thought she just needed rest. After telling her that, she completely exploded with rage. She stood up, began screaming at me, saying that I was a terrible boss and apparently extremely rude for telling her to go home. She then continued to call me every name in the book. I ended up turning into a psycho myself and telling her to leave. She was scaring off my customers. This is where she really loses it. She suddenly takes off her flip-flop, starts hitting it against the display cases, throws one at me. My ninja skills dodge that flip-flop. Psst. Flip-flops move incredibly slow when thrown, so I have no idea why I feel proud that I dodged it, seeing that the flip-flop does no damage. She grabbed one of the stiletto heels we sell, and she began to take the heel and scratch it against my glass display cases. She grabbed racks off the wall and started to throw it out of the store, into the mall. I lost my patience and tried to grab her arms and detain her. She slapped me with her flip-flop repeatedly. Must have looked hilarious, especially with that flip-floppy sound flip-flops make. Security finally showed up, detained her. Police were called for the damages. When police arrived, she headbutted the cop. He was alone. He put her in handcuffs, but she refused to get off the floor and walk outside to his cop car. Every time the cop would try to pick her up, she would just turn her legs limp, so he ended up throwing her over his shoulder and carrying her out of the mall. The entire time she was screaming out insults towards me and saying, "Going to fly me." I still have no idea what she meant with the word fly. I later got to find out from her ex-boyfriend, that he had broken up with her the morning before, and from friends in common. He found out she had gone their houses and tried slitting her wrists with a plastic fork. Apparently she had gotten completely trashed alone and just showed up making a scene at their houses and left on her own. I am now super suspicious when hiring my employees. No matter how put together a person appears to be, I will still assume there is a psycho underneath it all. Story 24. I work at a village shop in a really rural village in the middle of England, and it really does tick every ducking cliche in the book. Think Hot Fuzz, but without the shops, public transport, and community spirit. Every day I get the same old, small-minded human wank stain. But one day this bloke comes in and I can tell he isn't local. After a while living here, you develop a sort of sixth sense for outsiders. Anyway, he starts on asking about life in the village, and we get into a conversation. It's dead at the shop, so we talk for a while. I notice his accent isn't English, so I ask him where he's from, and he tells me he is originally from South Africa, but got kicked out in the 80s for protesting apartheid. So he moved to Australia, but hated the ways that treated the native Aborigines. So he has moved to rural England. I know we aren't exactly apartheid level, but round here, if you don't like racism, you're the odd one out. The girl I work with, a proper chav, starts muttering under her breath and rolling her eyes noticeably so we'd both notice, and he felt uncomfortable, so he left. My annoyance at losing one of the coolest customers I've ever had, I turned to her and asked her if she disagreed with him. She asked me to explain apartheid, and when I did, this is the response I got. "Ducking good. We should do that here." Stupid darkies talking to us like they're like us. I'm not being funny, but if I ever got in power, I'd have them all licking the floor and cleaning our shoes. The whole dirty lot of them. I'm sorry if you're friends with those sort of people. Actually, I'm not even sorry. It's just the way I feel. You shouldn't be friends with people like that if you don't want to hear racism. I was stunned into silent submission. Tel Dar. Cute, quaint villages are really ducking racist. Story 25. Quite a few years ago, my boss left our office in Washington, D.C. and went to Florida on a company-paid business trip. A publishers meeting was taking place near Tampa. It happened to be springtime, which is when baseball's spring training takes place. The second morning after my boss was away, the Washington Post publishes a photo on the front of the sports section showing a line of fans waiting to get autographs from Cal Ripken. Who's first in line? My boss. Later that day, I was in the office of my boss's boss with two other guys when my boss calls in. The head dude puts him on the speakerphone. The conference is going well, he says. He's meeting lots of good business contacts that should promote sales, he says. The meetings are running long and a little boring, but he's keeping up with them, he says. He gets back 2 days later and gets his company travel privileges suspended for 2 years. Story 26. About 6 years ago, I was a store manager at McDonald's in a small town in Ohio. Only fast food place in town, and the only staff I had was early morning old folks, and for all the evenings, all 16 to 24. But mostly high school kids. Every one of these high school kids complained about working Friday evenings, weekends in general, all very annoying. But that's how it goes, and someone is always going to get the short end of the stick. I had one kid who kept complaining that he hated working Fridays, but I told him that if he wanted hours, that's all I had. So he said, fine, see you on Friday. So Friday he comes in around 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. It's one of the longer shifts for the high school kids. Well, around 8 p.m., this kid takes a break, comes back at 8:30 p.m. Thought he looked a little funny, but I figured he smoked a joint or something. More than half the staff burn reefer. So, continuing through dinner rush, I catch out of the corner this kid slip and throw this tray of hamburgers flat against the ceiling, actually leaving hamburgers stuck to the ceiling. I'm like, whatever. Stop everything and go check on this kid. As soon as I approach him, he looks like he's going to cry. He kept apologizing, saying over and over he would never do it again. I knew something was up, but I really didn't have time to figure it out. So I told the kid to go sweep the parking lot. He said okay and went on his way. So I hop on the grill, do this kid's job so we can finish out dinner rush. When I hear the drive-through girl say, "What are you doing?" Then she ran to me. I'm like, what? She's like, "You have to see this." I go to the window and there's no car there. So I lean my head out the window to see what the holdup is. And as I'm sticking my head out the window, I see him. That poor dumb git somehow dropped his keys through this drain right by the drive-through window. Instead of asking for help, he pried open this huge gate that covers about a 6-foot drop, and there he was, in that hole. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't climb out. Had to stop everything, get 3 people from inside, and pull this kid out. As we were pulling him out, he confessed he was drunk. While on his 30-minute break, he drove to a friend's house where there was a party going on and beer bonged 8 beers. I fired him on the spot, called his home phone number to get his parents, even debated calling the police, but really, that job just sucked so bad, I just couldn't bring myself to press any harder on this kid. Was just like Whitey F. In reality, he's lucky to be alive. If that driver hadn't seen him jumping up and down, arms flailing, he could have been stuck under a car and died in that hole. Story 27. I worked for a big company years ago as the shipping manager. One of the guys I hired was an ex-Russian army guy. He was pretty good, hard worker and all that, still a little off, if you know what I mean. So one day, he doesn't show up and no phone call. The next day he calls me and he sounds like he's high. He's in the hospital. After work, I go by the hospital. We were kind of friends, and his whole right side is ducking black as night. Not a stitch of white. Serious bruising, broken leg and arm. I asked him what the hell happened, and he told me that him and his friends were having party in his 5th floor apartment. He was having an argument with one of his friends, as seemed to be a regular Russian thing for them to do. His friend was saying that he never follows through or something like that. So my friend stated that he always follows through. My friend says, "If I told you I would jump out that window, I would." His friend says, "Ha ha ha, you wouldn't dare." So crazy ducking Yuri runs and leaps out the window, down onto the parking lot below. He spent over a month in the hospital to prove a point. Ducking ridiculous. Story 28. An employee phoned in to say he had a bad cold and couldn't work that day, a Friday payday. He did, however, come in a half hour later to get his paycheck. He got royal crap for that move. Story 29. I used to be a part-time manager at Macy's. I've had employees steal money out of my purse, take breaks to smoke pot, get caught trying to steal hundreds of dollars, tell me they cleaned out the fitting room, only for me to find a locked fitting room full of clothes they just threw in there, give their friends discounts, and get fired for it. Call the store manager a fat pig to her face. You name it. They tried to get me to enroll in their management training program to become a full-time salaried employee. I said nope and went to law school instead. Story 30. My workplace, a major food supplier, has had its share of unique past employees. The first was years before I began working here, after the warehouseman left. My boss and her partner filled the position with a 30-something named Ryan. From what I was told, he was a great employee until he began propping his feet up on one of the desks on slow days and reading Us Weekly. The first time my boss joked with him, but Ryan didn't take kindly to her, calling him out the second and third time. All of a sudden, Ryan cursed at my boss, grabbed the nearest bottle of water, and dumped it down her back. She fired him on the spot. Unfortunately, she and her partner didn't see eye to eye on Ryan being fired, because they were short-staffed near 4th of July, and my boss's partner rehired Ryan. My boss had to grin and bear Ryan's smug, "I'm indispensable" attitude until the holiday rolled around. Long story short, on the 4th of July, Ryan thought it would be a good idea to use the forklift to stack pallets of computer paper up to the 30-foot-high ceiling. Why? To change the unburned-out light bulbs. Ryan ended up losing his footing, which caused his left leg to fall through the cage on the top of the forklift. Not only did he earn himself a severely torn hamstring and ambulance ride, but my boss had all the leverage she needed to fire him after he refused to tell her what he was doing. Although he received workman's compensation, the last my boss heard of Ryan was that he had pissed someone off and they beat the daylights out of him. Then there was Phil 2 years ago. When my boss introduced us, we got to talking and realized that we graduated together. He was engaged and took the warehouse job part-time for extra cash towards the wedding, and he proved to be a hard worker. For those of you sensing a but coming on, Phil's only issue was working on Sundays during the summer, which cut into beach time. So he asked my boss for every Sunday in the summer off, and she refused. The next week, Phil showed up late, so I made note of it and continued to log his hours from then on. When Phil began disputing his paychecks, I clued my boss into what I was doing, went back to the logs, and in so many words told Phil he couldn't get our gouging by me once again. We were coming up that magical time of year called the 4th of July holiday. And who decided to ask for the week off? My boss told him we needed his help, and the look on Phil's face showed he was not going quietly. Long story short, Phil didn't show up on the 4th, but did call to tell us that he was at the shore with his future in-laws when their camper fell off the hitch, and that's why he couldn't come in. Phil was promptly fired and had the nerve to dispute his unemployment claim being denied. Story 31. Not quite an employer, but I worked for a recruitment firm once. We'd get hired by companies to find the perfect employees for them. Once we were asked to find a mechanical engineer for a factory that made glass. This meant the best employee would have experience working with high-temperature systems, pressure systems, conveyor systems, and be willing to relocate. I found the perfect candidate. He had 10 years of experience in a nearly identical industry and couldn't wait to relocate. The company interviewed him and agreed he was perfect. They offered to hire him, but he declined. His reason: when I was leaving the interview, I noticed a jet leaving a contrail. For those who don't know, a contrail is a cloud-like trail jets leave behind them when the moisture in the exhaust hits the cold air. In fact, ever go outside and be able to see your breath? That's a contrail, he continued. I know for a fact jets leave contrails when they are seeding the population with diseases like anthrax. It happened once at my son's little league game. Contrail overhead, and the next day, my son caught a cold. Here are some conspiracy websites that prove it. We all thought it was a good thing he didn't take the job. Story 32. I used to teach swim lessons at a dive shop. The shop had a pool off the side that was square-shaped. About 3 feet of the perimeter around the pool was 3 feet deep. Then, in the middle, it dropped to 14 feet with a ramp leading down for scuba divers to practice in deeper water. Anyways, one day I was teaching lessons to a boy, about 4 or 5. He was crying and didn't want to swim, so his dad went and changed into a swimsuit and got in. No biggie. Parents usually have to do this. Well, I was holding the boy, trying to get him to kick. When out of the corner of my eye, I see arms thrashing and water going everywhere. I look to my left on the opposite side of the freaking pool, and there the dad is on the edge of the drop-off about to go under and can't freaking swim. I guess he didn't see the big gaping hole in the middle of the pool. Also, we ask if you can swim before letting you in the pool, and he said yes. Anyways, I panicked. I had nowhere to set the kid. I swam to where the guy was and reached out, prepared for the yank. All drowners do when they finally feel something to hold on to. BTW, this guy was stick thin, and I had a good 20 pounds on him. He pulled my hand way harder than I expected. He pulled my hand, which yanked me off the 3 feet, and all of us went into the 14 feet, poor child included. We all went underwater, and he kept pulling my hand and arm. I had 2 lives on my hand. Realizing this, I had a huge adrenaline rush and managed to release my arm from the dad. Grab his shirt with the same hand I was holding the kid. I reached up and grabbed the lip of the edge of the 3 feet area and pulled all 3 of us up. I pulled them both to the edge of the pool, coughing. I immediately started patting the kid's back and telling him to cough. I looked at the dad and he was over on the edge coughing, not even worried about his kid. He never said a word to me, no thank or nothing. I asked he could swim and he said no. So I said, then get the duck out of the pool. After I told my boss what happened, he asked them not to come back. Scariest moment of my life. Another mini story. I was lifeguarding at a pool in the projects and a woman's water broke in the pool and she went into labor. Also, there happened to be no keel in the pool. Yum. Story 33. I worked as a martial arts instructor in high school, and some of the other people were downright insane. very talented at martial arts, but bat-crap crazy. One guy was filling in for the owner, manning the front office. When his girlfriend broke up with him via text message, he locked the office door and ate strawberries and cried for an hour, while looking out the little window that connected the office and the front lobby. I would actually get parents coming to ask me if he was okay, because he just spent the rest of the day trashing the office in his sad state. Another guy was supposed to be helping the other instructors straighten up around the dojang during our last class, so we could get out early instead of spending an hour cleaning and straightening up at the end. So he offered to take out the trash. I was leading the class of middle schoolers in stretches, and the back door was behind me. I heard him leave for the dumpster. Then 10 minutes later, I heard the doors banging around like crazy and saw 3 other instructors running back to the locker room area. I let the kids take a water break and excused myself to the back to see what was wrong. Apparently, the genius decided that even though it was winter, he was going to man up and take the trash out in his uniform rather than bundling up. Since we worked barefoot, martial arts, this also meant no shoes. He ran outside to the dumpster without paying attention to where his feet were stepping in the parking lot, and a shard of glass went through his foot, as in penetrated the bottom of his foot and came out the top of his foot. He stumbled back in the door and managed to get in the girls' bathroom and stick his foot in the sink, but obviously had to go to the emergency room to get his foot stitched up. To make things better, he was testing for his 3rd-degree black belt the next morning, where he was required to break a concrete block with his foot that he had just put glass through. He actually pulled it off, though, broke straight through the block with one kick, then bled all over the floor as his stitches ripped out.